Everybody, and thank you everybody for being here. And I have to start to present the first presentation on digital technology and fundamental rights made by David Reichel of the European Union Fundamental Rights Agency. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, evening. First of all, thank you very much for having me. It was terribly interesting listening to the first panel presentations and having worked the first decade of my career on migration integration and only the past years having slipped almost entirely to digital technologies. It's a pleasure for me bringing the two together. So thank you again. I will in around 15 minutes, I hope, address three main areas. First, just give you a quick overview of recent policy developments in the area of digital technologies, mainly at the EU level, and see how this is addressed from a fundamental rights perspective. I will then highlight a few fundamental rights issues linked to the use of digital technologies, mainly focusing on artificial intelligence-related questions, and then finally also try to close and bringing a bit together digital technologies and fundamental rights of migrants. So what are we talking about? I always like this graph as a beginning of a presentation on new technologies. I mean, there are a lot of buzz terms floating around, which are pretty undefined in a way. So this graph shows Google trends on how people were searching for three selected buzz terms in this area: big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence. And it tells a bit of a story. You can, when you focus on the orange line, big data. So that was around in 2010 that people started searching for this term. And that's actually exactly the time when you remember yourself, when you had your first smartphone that had, as it's now, where you can use social media, for example, when you started using all these apps on your phone and started sending thousands of data points to thousands of different companies every day. And this is when people realized, oh, there's quite big data floating around. Then it took a while, so it's like 2 years later, the term machine learning is searched more often. Machine learning is technology, mainly statistical technology, to make predictions based on data. So of course, all these data were used for some purpose. And then also it took only a little while that people realized you can actually use predictions, machine learning, for things that were usually associated with human intelligence. So it can be used for artificial intelligence. And then, especially in the policy context, this term was quite well adopted, and people are speaking much about artificial intelligence. There was actually also quite a lot of searching in 2004, and I have no idea what it was. I think there was some Hollywood movie or whatever. Anyway, so these are three buzz terms, and it just reflects technological developments that are linked to faster processing of machines and collecting more data and using those data for applications. Although a clear definition would actually avoid of these terms. So this was, of course, also picked up in the policy sphere. First of all, importantly, to mention the General Data Protection Regulation, adopted in 2016, in force since 2018, as one of the most modern laws that can also be used to protect several fundamental rights of the use of big data. And is currently still being fought to be implemented in many areas of life. Then it was around 2017 also that the EU institutions started discussing AI and new technologies. It was the European Parliament publishing a few resolutions on big data, AI and robotics, and also mentioning ethical concerns and fundamental rights issues that may be linked to the use of new technologies. Also the EU Council in its October 2017 conclusions urged the European Commission to get active and do something about this. And see how Europe can address AI and new technological developments. And as a reaction to this, the European Commission got active in April 2018 with several initiatives. It created a high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, where the head of my unit was a member and I was an observer too. Working on ethical guidelines on the use of AI, policy recommendations were published. And the Commission very soon after that also was quite clear on coming up with a regulation, a law that deals with the use of artificial intelligence. And they wanted to do this very quickly. It was not that quickly as intended in the beginning. So first a white paper on AI was published in February 2020, outlining the intentions and plans of a new law. There was also a cooperation among EU member states planned in an agreement on cooperation where member states joined forces on funding new technologies. And finally, in April 21, the Commission published a proposal for a regulation on artificial intelligence. And this proposal is right at this moment being discussed in the European Parliament among 3 different committees. The Council puts forward compromise texts, and the plan is to get it through in the course of next year. But this is actually hard to predict what will happen to these discussions. At the same time, importantly, to mention the Digital Services Act adopted by the Council and the Parliament in July 2020, and that's a very important law that addresses the large platforms, or as they're also called, the very large online platforms especially. They have particular provisions in there to also assess the risks of fundamental rights when using their services. There was also a declaration on digital rights and principles published by the Commission in January 22, which is sort of an action plan for also increasing digital inclusion and the positive aspect of using services in many different areas. So I'm trying to rush a bit for the sake of time, but so there's quite an active policy making ongoing right at this stage, where fundamental rights are quite at the core of these discussions. Also, other international actors are working on laws. The Council of Europe, only last week there was a committee meeting in Strasbourg where they discuss a convention on artificial intelligence. So there's a 0 draft available. And should be there by the end of next year. We also don't know what the negotiations will look like, but it's quite active policy making there as well. The OECD has principles on the use of artificial intelligence. UNESCO, as a global actor, adopted ethics guidelines on the use of artificial intelligence, and it's working on its implementation. And yeah, so the many international organizations are cooperating with each other also. There's some informal group that we are also part of called globalpolicy.ai, trying to speak to each other because within their respective mandates, all these organizations are grappling with similar questions in this respect. So what is the Fundamental Rights Agency doing? What is my day job? In the past 5 years or so, we published several reports. I mean, first of all, we have a handbook on data protection law, which I think is a very useful tool on getting to know like how you can apply data protection law also to new technologies. We published a report on discrimination and algorithms, highlighting this issue, which is not too well known on several people, how this can happen. Data quality and AI is a very relevant topic also for fundamental rights issues. Facial recognition technology we addressed in a paper. And then we had a larger report in December 2020 called Getting the Future Right, where we did a horizontal analysis and highlighting a couple of fundamental rights issues based on interviews with users and developers of AI in the EU. And also reacting to the ongoing policy developments and feeding into this process. We also have a report upcoming in November this year on bias and algorithms, where we did some simulation studies and case analysis on speech detection on the one hand and predictive policing on the other hand. And this will be published in November. And then, of course, we engage in these policy processes in discussion with the Commission and the Parliament, the Council, and the Council of Europe, of course, as well, to make sure that fundamental rights remain at the core of these discussions. So what are the fundamental rights implications? First of all, I have to say the use of digital technologies is welcome. It's always a surprise to me, but when starting to complain about fundamental rights infringements, sometimes it gets lost. So I think in the earlier panel we have seen enough examples of how good use new technologies can have, and in general it is very positive. But of course there is also the danger of negative impacts in certain areas. So I would like to highlight 3 of them, which we have in our report: data protection, non-discrimination, and access to an effective remedy. But in principle, virtually any fundamental rights in the Charter can be impacted, because new technologies, AI is an ubiquitous technology, can be used in all areas of life, and this will also impact in these areas. And we have to be cautious. So data protection and privacy, I mean, of course, most of these technologies are based on loads of data and personal data, which means that the GDPR kicks in, or the law enforcement directive when it comes to the work of law enforcement authorities. And the GDPR provides a quite good level of protection. What the challenge at the moment is implementing the GDPR. And I think it's sometimes, it can be overinterpreted. Sometimes it's not strong enough and it's not kicking in where it should be. And I think that's the main focus from legal perspective at the moment. However, we also know that there's limited awareness of rights among rights holders. So, for example, in the general population, we did a survey in 2019 among all people in the EU, and asked people if they know, for example, that they have the right to access their data held by public administration or by private companies. And it was only 60% knew that such a law exists, in fact, and only half of the population knew that they can access the data at private companies. Also, what is important for online services, we know, of course, as you know, people click away very often the consent forms. So we know that people either don't read the terms and conditions when using online services, and among those who read them, many of them actually don't understand what's in there. So it's around half of the people don't read or don't understand what's going on. What is more, people sometimes lack technical skills. So it's 24% of the people we interviewed, they don't know where you can check the privacy settings on your smartphone if they have one. And that's, of course, a problem as well. There's limited awareness about other rights in relation to automated decision-making. The Eurobarometer showed that only 60% of EU citizens know that they can actually opt out of direct marketing. And only 40% know that they can have a say when there are automated decisions. And of course, importantly, poorer people from disadvantaged groups are even less aware of those rights. And that, I think, is also important for the area of migrant integration. Second area, non-discrimination. So many people are aware that it can happen. So data-supported decision-making can create, if it wasn't there, it can perpetuate if it was there, and it can even exacerbate discrimination against people. And there are several reasons why this can happen. I mean, one is biased data, for example. I mean, if police forces, there's an example in the United States, wanted to build a predictive policing system based on data in police forces who were actually found to be engaged in ethnic profiling. So, of course, if you use those data to develop an algorithm, it will at least perpetuate what was going on before. And this is, of course, a problem when you enshrine discriminatory racist behavior into algorithms. It can also be unrepresentative data. A well-known example is the use of facial recognition technology, where it was soon found out that it actually works quite well for white male faces like mine, but not at all for female and black faces. And the reason was quite easy. It was mainly fed with the training data were mainly white male faces, so there was no diversity in the training data, and this led to huge mistakes actually when this technology was used. As just one fundamental rights challenge when using this technology. And then there are also other reasons. Detecting it is quite difficult. When we interviewed people using new technologies, they usually said, yeah, we know it can happen, discrimination, but not ours. Ours is fine. Often people think they don't use information on protected characteristics, so we have no gender included in our algorithm, we have no ethnic origin, so it's all fine. But that's not true, especially the question of proxies, as I have that last point. So there's, of course, a lot of information in datasets that highly correlates with protected characteristics, with ethnic origin, with gender, and so forth. And this needs to be assessed before tools are used that impact, support decisions that impact on people's life. And the last area is access to an effective remedy that we highlighted. So whenever the decision is being made about people, you of course have the right to complain. You can contest decisions. And this is getting a bit more difficult when people use more advanced technologies to support their decisions. Even though we found that there were not many complaints so far. I mean, they're increasing, but I think on the one hand, people are often not aware that some algorithms are used for decision making, which is a big problem. On the other hand, it's also that at the moment, we are really at the time where these technologies are starting to be picked up. So many public administrations, private companies are working on the use of algorithms, but are not using them yet. And here, what we highlight is the importance of transparency and explainability. So first of all, people need to know algorithms are used. Secondly, people need to know where and how to complain about decisions. And lastly, and then it's with the users of AI, they need to be able to explain how they arrived at these decisions. And that's quite a highly contested area because people say, oh my, AI is so complicated, we actually don't know how it arrives at certain decisions. And then it's important to push back and say, for important decisions, that's not acceptable. You have to explain. And in fact, there are ways to do that. So it's also important to not accept it's not explainable. Yes, so these are the generic fundamental rights that impact on all people in a way where these technologies are used. So now trying to think about how this is relevant also for migrants. Of course, as we heard this morning, not this morning, in the panel before this panel, that migrants, of course, benefit from new technologies. I mean, there are really good ways of accessing information in an easier way. It makes traveling easier, actually. It makes many bureaucratic procedures easier. So that's, of course, a very positive effect. At the same time, there are also challenges, for example, discrimination, as I mentioned. And I think, of course, discrimination against migrants based on ethnic origin is an important area that needs to be focused on much more stronger. There are a couple of examples. Insurance-based algorithms in Italy using country of birth as one of the determinants. There was a huge scandal in the Netherlands where dual citizenship information was used for detecting tax fraud, and which led to thousands of false detections of tax fraud, which even destroyed the life of a few families. So that's a big problem. Also in Austria, the employment service uses citizenship data in their algorithm, and it needs to be scrutinized much better how this can lead to discrimination. Then, of course, new technology are much used in migration management, border management especially. So there's a huge appetite of border management authorities to use new technologies. Just to mention a few, there's the European Travel Information Authorization System, ETIAS, which is a screening algorithm that is planned to be used as of next year for any traveler from non-visa countries to the EU. So every third country national from a non-visa country will be subjected to the screening algorithm to see if there's a risk for irregular migration, for the security or epidemic risks. And this, again, of course, bears challenges of discrimination, data protection, and so forth. EES, the entry and exit system. So all third country nationals traveling to the EU, planned it is as of end of next year. We'll send the data through this and will be registered when entering and registered when exiting. And that's to counteract overstaying in the EU. There's also facial images are processed, facial recognition technologies planned to be used. And this strongly needs to be safeguarded based on fundamental rights, which is part of the discussions on the implementation of these new technologies. Yeah, just the visa information system, Eurodac, and so forth. So it's a huge area of work that is relevant. And yeah, lastly, not just these specific applications at the EU level, but also the AI Act proposal includes high-risk AI. So it, on the one hand, forbids some uses of artificial intelligence. Then it has a body of high-risk applications. These are subjected to certain requirements. And among the high-risk cases, there are, of course, a lot of areas in the area of migration. For example, the use of polygraphs, meaning lie detectors for asylum seekers, that should be considered as high risk. I think that's more than high risk. It's actually something that should be forbidden because, yeah, it has several issues to use this technology. But then there are also others, verification of travel documents, deciding on asylum applications and so forth. They are considered as high risk and need to be scrutinized before they can actually be used. Yeah, that was a quick, I hope in time, tour on fundamental rights issues when using new technologies. Again, I think it's important to have a positive approach to the use of new technologies, but still always consider these aspects before using them because it's new. We haven't fully understood some of these technologies, and in many areas it's just not acceptable to use them without checking for fundamental rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this interesting presentation, and thank you also for the reports that you have mentioned. That because we have used all the fundamental, all the reports made by the Agency for the Fundamental Rights. In particular, we have studied your reports on 2020. Yes, because we have analyzed and we have briefly mentioned in our policy brief the risk of discrimination in using artificial intelligence. And it is very useful and also all the other information, so thank you so much. Now I have to introduce Mariam Karimi from the Polytechnic University of Milan. The presentation is mainstreaming human rights literacy in service provision, the easyRights policy recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. You have that. I should change it. Good afternoon, everyone. Many new faces. Let me see how many people we don't have. Okay, I can see who is not from our consortium meeting. Over there. Nice. Perfect. We have 3. Okay. Okay, we can 6. Okay. We decided to divide the presentation, so I will give a little. I will go very fast because I think more or less also our guests, you already are familiar quite with easyRights project. So I will go some slides very fast, and Federica will give us some findings, about our policy brief document. Before we're starting, as you can see the title, we are going to share with you, with our beloved consortium, partners, and also the 3 guests we have it, to share with you what we learned from the policy, dimension. What is the result of the work we did from the, from the more, about not just talking about the technology, but we're looking at what we mean by human rights when we're talking about easyRights. What do we mean by right? Yesterday, Francesco was talking about informational right. Now we are talking more a little bit broader. What do we mean by human rights and mainstreaming human rights literacy? Specifically, we talk about human rights literacy. In easyRights, we produced 2 policy brief documents. The first policy brief, we were talking about very broad idea, what we mean by human rights literacy. And we define it. I will show you briefly what we mean that. I think more or less you're all familiar with this, human rights literacy. And the second policy brief that we recently submitted a couple months ago, we disentangled human rights literacy and we focus on how we can mainstream human rights literacy in service design and supply. What do we mean by human rights literacy? So for us in easyRights, as you already now know, service is crucial. Designing a service, we really focus on service and designing a service. The service that already existed for migrants. For us, we define service as sort of interface between human and people. So how we define human rights literacy? As we went through the literature, it's very quite difficult to find this definition of human rights literacy. So we understood that human rights literacy, as we said, that service can be interface between rights and people, citizens, including migrants. It constitutes the understanding of the process and implication of human rights in social context. What does that mean, basically? So it means that we look at human rights in this dimension. We understood that human rights, we look at the articles, we look at the journals, literature review, we understood that, okay, human rights, it's already mentioned in several literature, that is a result of social practices and diffusion. It can be declaration, publication, interpretation in different manner and translation in different contexts and social fields. Also, human rights, several scholars, several researchers in the research field in academia mentioned that human rights, it doesn't matter exactly what does that mean. We know that we have experts about human rights as our discussant, but also it's more important, we know what we can do with that. What job has already done and we can go forward with that. And also human rights, we all know that it can be a political tools of articulation of experience of injustice. We saw that David, where is David? Sorry, I don't see. So we were talking about this, right? We know that and discrimination can happen. So it can be a kind of sort of political tools as well. Having said that, I don't go details about what easyRights. We already know what easyRights project was that. So we focus on, we had ICT component in our project. We created chatbot. So already, I think more or less everybody in this room know what is easyRights, and we tested. We developed solution in 4 pilot cities, 2 services each pilot city selected. So what we did, how we explore human rights literacy, basically, in our service provision. We try to understand the basic problem related to human rights literacy. And then we draw some policy recommendation out of that. So we try to we try to explore how human rights literacy in service provision, and we did we used different techniques and methods. Qualitative, mainly, we were focusing on qualitative approach. What we did, we tried to assess the knowledge of human rights and how, if there are any human rights awareness exists among different actors that they were involved. You also that how many stakeholders they were involved. And our pilots were narrating the stories of creating, developing the solution and working on the hackathons. Many stakeholders were involved. So we try to understand what is the level of understanding of human rights among these actors. Especially we were focusing on service providers. If the operators, people they working, sitting on the counter, having a direct contact, a conversation with migrants, if they have any understanding, if they had any training, any experience on human rights, the issue of human rights or working with migrants, what about the director of the service? What about the ICT developers who build, who create these services in terms of digital service, not only even digital, even analog and manual service? If they have any understanding, if they have any training on that. So we explored the potential of also technology-supported services of interface for human rights. What we did, we had the diaries, we asked our pilots to constantly reporting about their work. So we call it pilot's diary. We use it as a collective, as a tool to collectively collect the information came from pilots when they were doing interviews with each stakeholder. We had participant observation. We also conducted a survey with ICT developers, and we distributed widely, regardless of the service of our services, that we focus on 8 services, 7 services, including Wikispace, but we distributed widely around, and we asked ICT developers, coder, designers, to give us the answer, if they know anything about human rights, if they were involved in this, if they had any training, and also we had interviews. We collect all the information, and now I give the floor to Federica to tell us what we find. I know you are all excited to know because you don't know.
Good afternoon. After going through all this information collected through the project at different stages of the project, from the beginning, at the beginning of 2020 to mid-2022 almost, we realized that three main findings mainly guide our policy recommendations. So, first of all, that we observe that there is a substantial degree of awareness of the link between human rights and service provision, but at the same time, there is an important gap in training in this area. The second finding that guided our drafting of the policy recommendations was that the organizational complexity of municipal offices, but also the length of processes and the inefficiencies of service providers often sometimes create some spaces of immobility where migrants cannot really properly exercise their rights, so that the application of human rights, the respect of human rights, very much also depend on the interaction between actors in the process. And then the third finding was that the level of concern about human rights and the level of understanding and awareness of human rights within service provisions in the ecosystem of the services depend also on the composition and the nature of the interaction between all these actors of the ecosystem. So based on that, we identified three main areas of intervention where policy recommendations can be made. So that we called three pillars of a successful strategy to increase human rights literacy in service provision and design. The first being education and training, the second being awareness raising and empowerment, and the third being the organization of the delivery process and the practices behind service provision. On education and training, the analysis that we conducted through the project showed that, as also mentioned yesterday during the discussion in our bigger presentation of the project, many times training is available in many of the pilots that we have observed, among many of the organizations that we have observed, but training isn't targeted. Many times training is very general, and so there is a lack of targeted training on human rights and migration and migrants issues that has to be filled. A lot of the training available, the training offer, really depends on the availability of the individuals to improve their knowledge and everyday work. And yesterday, for example, Bernard Perschenik from ICMPD mentioned that many times public administrations risk being silos that do not really open to external actors. And this also, we observed, actually applies to training offer, which is done internally without involving many time, at least for the design of training courses, external actors that could enlarge and increase the knowledge available. And another aspect that we observed on training and education is that the content of the training sometimes lacks legal grounding. So there is a general understanding and a content related to human rights and migration, but there is a lack of legal grounding in this respect. So this is something that we highlighted in the policy recommendations. On awareness raising and empowerment, here I wanted just to mention that awareness here for us refers to the acknowledgement by the actors involved in service design and provision of the human rights implications of their actions. And empowerment concerns rather the increased actors' capacity to perform their work according to a human rights-oriented approach. So the interviews that we also conducted and the survey show that while civil servants and actors in the process are aware of the fact that the lack of access to services can have a negative impact on migrants' access to rights, there is much less awareness that the possible limitation to the enforcement of human rights can arise from everyday practices. And so that micro practices can play also an important role in increasing human rights at every step of service provision. And the third block that guided policy recommendations is related to the processes and practices of service provision. From this perspective, we saw that a human rights-centered approach to service design means that the procedures, forms, and tools of interactions throughout the process should be, at every step, should be informed by human rights consideration. And here, what we realized was important in analyzing a bit the dynamics within the different ecosystem is that the presence of collaborative forms of cooperation and governance within the pilot, the level of engagement among the actors can really increase, even when training is lacking, can increase human rights literacy because actors speak to each other, they can learn from each other, they overcome this silos dimension that we have mentioned yesterday. So even when funding is lacking to increase human rights literacy, then if actors are used to interact, are used to develop, to learn from each other and to take collaborative decisions, then these gaps can be filled. So I don't want to take more time on that, and we haven't gone through policy recommendation per policy recommendation, but rather address that in the 3 pillars. But of course, then I invite you also to have a look at the final results and outcomes of our policy brief. So just to summarize, on education and training, a stronger knowledge of human rights and human rights protection should, for example, integrate tertiary education. Training of interested civil servants should be focused on migration issues. And courses and training should have a comprehensive approach to migration issues. On raising awareness and empowerment activities, these should become part of the curriculum even of continuing education of personnel in public administration. And outreach activities, this turned out to be very important even through the project, should include a listening space to make sure that migrants' narratives and users inform the provision of public services. And on processes and practices in service provision, we saw that diversity of backgrounds in personnel supporting migrants should be supported to better acknowledge some essential migrants' needs. That ICT interfaces should be simple and usable by simple basic digital skills, and that migrants, as actually easyRights overall confirms, should be included in the design, development, and testing phase of the services interfaces. I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Thank you, Federica, for this very interesting presentation. I want just a moment to underline that we have done together a lot. We have realized a lot of interviews. We have analyzed a lot of studies, academic studies. We have tried to formulate some very interesting and useful policy recommendation. So thank you for this, Mariam and Federica. And after all this work, we have realized this difficult work with the very, very important help of the pilot city. After this difficult work, we have realized in March of this year, that everything is possible with the temporary protection. We have realized that the access to fundamental rights is easier, it's really easier. We have realized that millions of people in a few weeks has had the access to health, to job, a permission to job suddenly, a permission of studying in our university. We have realized it in just a few weeks after 3 years of hard works and study. So I want to underline that we have an great historical opportunity of having a big human laboratory now of human being that has had suddenly in Europe access to this right. And so I want just to put to reflect on it. Also for the migrants coming from other countries. We know that the non-discrimination principle is the cornerstone of the European Union, and so we can apply the same provision and the same practical tools to all the migrants coming in Europe from all the countries. I want just to say, anticipating a little bit the further presentation, that we had the chance this year of having read the new regulation of the agency of the European Agency for Asylum that provide all the provision that all the provision that we have analyzed and studied since now are provided. And so they acknowledge the empowerment of human rights, the control of by an authority on the awareness of human rights, the control of the right application of human rights. So we have the chance, I think this is my little contribution, my little point of view, that we have a great chance of seeing in the reality how our studying realize it. And so we can have a reflection on it, that because everyone has asked to me and to us, yes, everything is good, you have reason, but the sustainability of this project, the sustainability is in the reality now. So thank you for your great job that I have seen during these 3 years. And congratulations, because your job now is in the reality in the European Union. So I think that it's really a great chance. I introduced the last presentation on human rights and migration in integration, local perspective, by Fatma Khalil Hamoud and Leila Hadi Abdu. Thank you. Yes, sorry. The city of Vienna, yes, the University of Vienna.
Okay, so do you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. So we have the burden to be the last one, so we hope you're still following. So I was very delighted to hear also your policy recommendation, Federica and Mariam, because I think many of those we have already implemented, and for sure for others we can still learn. So we want to give you a little bit an overview about our activities and what we do in the field of human rights and what our understanding is. And also, because here often, before I heard the word public administration versus migrants, and I think like many of us also from other city municipalities, we really have the experience that it's not the administration versus the migrants, we are the migrants. So also in our department, the overwhelming majority are of migrant origin and very diverse. So you'll find people from all over the world with all kinds of languages, with refugee background, without refugee background, with Austrian citizenship, with foreign citizenship, people who are like practicing Muslims, people who are without faith, people who are Buddhists. So we really mirror the Viennese society in this sense. So I think, and that's also one of our huge benefits, that we don't only like think what migrants might need, but all of us, or most of us, had the experience of being a migrant, or being, like in my case, second-generation migrant, what it means for your families, for your everyday life. So I think that's really, in this sense, we are a distinct public administration, and I think it fits very well to our mission. So I want to come immediately to the relevant dimension. Of course, human rights has many dimensions, but when you think really what is the most relevant for us at the local level, it's really economic, social, and cultural rights. So I don't have to teach you, all these economic, social, and cultural rights, but it's really education we are partly responsible for in the city, partly the nation state. So we play a role there. It also comes to working conditions, especially when it's our own employees. You have to think of the city of Vienna as a huge employer of many people. So also here, of course, human rights and anti-discrimination is crucial. Social security, welfare, housing, are important, of course, tasks, and also the participation in cultural life and respect for cultural, religious, and linguistic diversity. So to make it a little bit more practical, what we mean by this, so what is our scope of action? Where can we really do something? Where does our work explicitly link to human rights? So this is really in the implementation, so social services and goods and health provision. So our hospitals, for instance, we have one of the biggest health associations in the country, the Wiener Krankenanstaltenverband, for those of you who are familiar with the institution. We have care centers for the elderly, municipal housing, what Vienna, of course, is historically known for, but also other types of subsidized housing and support for people without accommodation, the so-called Wohnungslosenhilfe. And for instance, despite the crisis, when we look at the number, it's a huge issue, of course, I don't want to talk it away, but despite the crisis, the numbers of people without accommodation is going back because of also this support. Much more can be done, of course, like always, but I just want to highlight this as one thing. Of course, children's rights is something that is very important for us, like also in terms of kindergarten provisions, youth work and youth education, but also rights of disabled person, which the Social Fund of Vienna, it's one of its core responsibilities. So I just want to mention, when you think of a city, and a huge city like Vienna is, so this is really the scope of action where we can add something to human rights and where we can bring human rights alive, so to say. But now I really want to come to my department, our department, which is the Department of Integration and Diversity. As I said, we're a bit like the exots within the public administration, as we are basically all migrants ourselves. And our understanding of migration is really an equality-based concept. So here is also where the link, of course, very strongly is to human rights. So we define integration, of course, is a challenging term. I myself have criticized it very often in many contexts as an academic, but I think if you think it and you make it clear what the definition is, so we have a very much rights-based approach. Integration for the city of Vienna, for our department, means equal rights and opportunities, as well as equal possibilities of social participations in all spheres of life. So that's really our political aim, and this is what we're here for, to implement this definition and concept of integration. And also, when you read our documents, you will realize that it's a really very broad equality understanding, because we define as Viennese as everybody who lives in Vienna and has his or her main residency in the city. So, and we demand and call for and work towards resident security, equal access to high quality education, economic self-sufficiency, affordable housing, of course, equal access to health and social services, and equal access to cultural life. And Viennese, all Viennese should be able to participate politically and socially in shaping our city. So to say in more sociological parlor, the right to the city, so to say. So this is really our political mandate, what we are working towards too. Yeah. So, and also I think it's of relevance when you look also at the data in terms how diverse our city is. When you think of a diverse city, many of you will associate a city like New York, right? But actually, when you look at our numbers, we are more diverse than New York when it comes to people with an foreign origin, persons of foreign origin, what we call. So this is our statistical definition. It means persons who were either born abroad or who have a foreign citizenship. And when you look at this number, it's at, to be very correct, 42.6, so 43%, let's say. So this is the percentage which is really similar to cities like London and even higher than cities like New York. And we have now two elements which we wanted to talk about. And the first one, or one of them, is research and monitoring, which is one of our core work, which is, in this case, my work area to identify and measure inequalities and discrimination. So the political aim is really to identify and to see, and this is really based also on our commitment of objectification, measurability, and information. So this is one of our political tasks we have to fulfill in the sense, and then of course the projects on the ground to directly support migrant communities. And I will hand over to my colleague Fatma, who is doing and executing these projects on the ground.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. Yeah, I will turn to the practical part. And you see there is a picture here with a lot of different women. We are in a garden. Why we are here and why this picture, it's, the meaning is very, very value for me, because I have here a project to start with newcomer. Most of them are refugees, and which right do they have here? They have the right of education. Most of them have high school education or university degrees, but they don't have the right to, or they can't recognize it here in Austria because they don't speak German. And we try to support them or to offer them financial support to be able to learn German. Yeah, here is an example. I will give it around to see it. We have two kinds. Maybe you can give it around. Thank you. We have two kinds of booklet. One is for EU, European member, with 150 euros. The other one is for non-European member who has to fulfill the integration agreement. What does it mean, integration agreement? To learn German within 2 years, to pass an exam, A2 exam, to be able to continue their life here. Of course, it's a fast step. So you can learn German, you can pass A2 within 6 months. But if you don't have the possibility to speak what you are learning at school in the courses, so it would be very difficult to feel integrated here, to feel you are a part of this society, Austrian society. That's what we try to help in education. We help also in recognizing their diploma, even if they still don't speak German. We try to help them. This is my next flyer. You can keep it too. We started with the education booklet 2008, October 2008, and very fast we noticed that the people, the newcomer, they need more to be more a companion. They need in their first language, in their mother tongue, to be to find out what can I do. I can speak German, and this is my next one. The flyer is we are a team of 7 ladies and several languages, and we try to accompany them, to help them, and to let them integrate, Russia integrate in Austria. We have also projects to empower them, to empowerment them. We wish, but they have also their own wishes. They have their own problems. And that's why we try with them, what can we do? What do you like? Which project do you like to let us start? And the idea can come from them. And so we started also with herbal garden, with community cooking, or with a very easy project for them. It was for them very, very important, sewing and knitting and to make crochet with the wool and so on. And it was important because through this project we can connect them together to the Austrian people, to the Austrian ladies who are sitting at home or they want to exchange with the newcomer experience and their own experiences, and to talk about the way to reach us, to Austria. It wasn't an easy way. It was a very difficult way. And to feel happy here, or to feel part of the society, it was very important to accompany these ladies. Which information lectures did we, in addition to this booklet or flyer second level? These are, we started for the refugees with asylum law, how is the process going on, what can they do, where can they work, and so on. And we had a lot of volunteers to let them work with us in their own language, in Arabic or Farsi or Dari, and to feel they can do something. They can do it maybe better than me because they are very new here. They have the same feeling they had on the way to escape, to reach us. They can understand the other refugees. Healthcare system. If a lady is pregnant, where can she go? What can she do? What are their human rights as a woman, as a pregnant woman? Am I allowed to work? Till which month can I work? And so on. What after delivering the baby? Can I have monthly income? So we try them to support them. Or Austrian labor market. When do I have the right to receive unemployment benefit or welfare benefit? What are the requirements of this law to receive it? So, or education, if I am 50 or 40 years old and I had, let's say, for example, in Syria, I have finished my compulsory education, but I dream to be higher. I dream to finish something else, to be a teacher or a kindergarten assistant or something like this. So we are here to accompany them, to give them the right information, how to do this. And there are a lot of opportunities in Austria to do this. housing in Vienna. If I want to rent an apartment, how do tenancy look? Which are my rights and what are my obligations, and so on. So there are a lot of more and more, and we try to extend all these projects. We ask the groups, what do they need? Where are the spots? What can do more to reach faster, to feel integrated? I give you an example. It was a lady, she was a director of a school. She went to the labor market service in Vienna. Because she didn't speak German, the consultant there offered her a job as a cleaner. Of course, she was upset, but she wasn't able to discuss with her consultant. And we started to learn German. She learned, and she is now working in a school as a first language teacher, as an assistant. If you don't speak German, so you feel, or if you don't speak the language of the country you are living in, so you feel, never mind how high your education is, you feel analphabetical. And we try to, that's why we make networking, we connect with others who speak German, never mind if Russian or Arabic or Turkish. So we all have to learn German, and we try to practice what do they learn in courses. Yes, also with communities from all over the world. Everyone has the right to develop or to establish a community for its own. After fulfilling the requirements, and we try, if, let's say I speak Arabic, so I try to have my own project, my own community, and so we met. This was in April this year. It was still the pandemic, and we tried to meet with our major and to discuss how can we dissolve all the troubles, which challenges met us during Corona. The homeschooling, it was a very big problem for all families who are living in a small apartment with more than 2 kids, 3 kids, sometimes 5 kids, and they have just only 2 rooms. How could the kids learn without the right equipment? They don't have enough computer to learn online. So we discussed what can we do if we still have these challenges. How can we dissolve these problems all together, all communities, all presidents of the communities in Vienna. Yeah, thank you.
I want to come a little bit to finish off again to the research part and the numbers part, so to say. So, like as I said, an important point of our work is research and monitoring, and you mentioned it as a good policy recommendation, so we hope that many will look at our integration and diversity monitoring, I think for which we are known Europe-wide, because we were among the first who implemented this tool. And really, the political aim is explicit here to identify and measure structural inequalities, right? And disadvantages. So, and also to do this, we either support research or we commission research, also small research projects. So these are just two which we lately supported. One was about Ukrainian arrivals in Austria, at the situation, and the other one is why do some people so it's a puzzle that many people would qualify for Austrian citizenship, which would grant them much more access, but not all do take this right or do exercise these rights, and we wanted to know why, what are the barriers, So this was another study. But in general, these are just latest ones, but this is also something we have in our portfolio to support external research or even to commission. And we ourselves, we do, so that's also part of my job. So these data and facts, which I distributed, the new one will come out very soon, which I was writing. So it's about data and facts in Vienna that you really know in the different levels, where do we have still to work, where are structural inequalities at play, how many people have citizenship, how many people are excluding from the voting right, how is it like in terms of housing conditions. So, and this we do much more in depth in the integration and diversity monitoring, which is published every 3 years, which has more in-depth statistical analysis, where we look at different areas. We'll go after into that. So, and this monitoring has two parts, and the one is the integration monitoring, which really is about the population, which measures the social position of the Viennese population and the equality of access to social positions, goods and services. And then it's the diversity monitoring, where we, so to say, evaluate ourselves. Where do we stand? How can we do better? So really, it's on a voluntary basis, but each year more and more institutions of the city of Vienna take part and discuss also internally. So also this triggers an internal discussion process within the municipal authorities. So these are the two parts, and then I just wanted very quickly, so it's really, when I spoke before, what are the essential core dimensions of human rights in the city where they are of relevance, and these are the ones that we tackle in the integration monitoring, and to look at it, where do we stand, what about the social inequalities in these areas. In the diversity management, where we, so to say, evaluate the city, it's about the personnel, and here the idea is, of course, that city administration shall mirror society. So we want all the other municipal departments to become a little bit more like us, so to say. And the acknowledgement of promotion of skills of all employees, and of course anti-discrimination awareness raising, but also when it comes to the delivery of services, right, that they very much focus also what are the anti-discrimination directives, how to treat the customers, and address also individual needs. And also what are the organizational strategies which the heads of each administration units come up with in order to ameliorate the situation when it comes to that diversity, like in terms of ethnic diversity, right? This is what we are focused on to represent that. So, and here also, and you also mentioned training as a big leg, and I think here we really also very committed. So we provide training courses for executives, so we train them on diversity issues, we train them on Vienna as an immigration city, about the history, about the rights of migrants. Also we give training for the police. So my colleague, who is the lawyer, she trains the police in jointly with the Officer for Human Rights, also at the City of Vienna. We have our own seminar on human rights and the city. And we also coach and advise other departments and have a peer exchange, because our idea is that we saw in a soft way incrementally change the city via exchange and providing also our knowledge and skills on the issue. Oops, so I think that's about it. You can also look at our current monitoring. As I said, the data and facts I provided, but for us that's really an important grounding our work also in this type of knowledge. So I stop here because probably we already gone over time. So I want to thank you, and of course if you have any question, need more material, you can always contact us. So thanks so much for your attention.
I just wanted to thank you, Laila, thank you, Fatme. And it's a pity that you couldn't attend since the beginning, the previous panel, and I really hope that you can join the dinner later, so as to interact with the 4 pilots of the project, because many of the things, first of all, I recognize myself very well in the presentations that you did, because I arrived in Vienna as a pregnant woman without speaking German, and actually, so I went through some of the services and myself, but some of the dynamics that you have described, that you are addressing, have been in different ways described by the different pilots, and part of the goals of the easyRights project is exactly to add in a way the digital dimension also to some services that you also have identified. So I really hope you can attend. If not, we will make sure that you get in touch with the pilots and that you get the contacts so that you can exchange afterwards. But thank you again for the very nice presentation. I leave the floor to Paola and then to the discussants.
Thank you very much to the City of Vienna, and I quickly introduce Peter Zlominski for the University of Vienna. Thank you so much as discussant, and Emilio De Capitani, former Secretary of the Civil Liberty Committee of the European Parliament. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to briefly comment on these 3 contributions, and I was asked to provide some remarks from a more academic, more political science perspective. I hope I can do that. And I think these were 3 very good, very informative, and very relevant papers. And was also very interesting for me was they nicely spoke to each other and focusing on improving the level of integration of third country national migrants, refugees through a rights-based approach. Coming to the first paper or presentation on digital technologies and fundamental rights. Here I can not much add because this was a very comprehensive, very up-to-date overview of the recent developments on EU policies, laws, initiatives provided by the Commission, the European Council, the Council and the Parliament. Maybe just 2 brief questions. I was wondering to what extent these technologies, and you mentioned that technologies can exacerbate, perpetuate discrimination on one hand, but also they can benefit migrants. So I was interested how technologies can be used to mitigate or even remedy some of the problems the second paper addressed with regard to housing problems, with regard to education, health issues. Is this something the EU level can actually do, or do you see any forms of initiatives or cooperations the EU level is pursuing, especially not only the classical EU institutions, but also your agency, the Fundamental Rights Agency, or the other EU agencies, the EU Asylum Agency, which also focuses on the strengthening of the service quality of public administration. So, do you see some developments here? And in particular, I would be interested to hear more if the EU is mainly focusing on passing laws, adopting laws, or reporting and monitoring, or are there further initiatives like training courses? Of course, you mentioned the training courses of, and we also heard in the third paper, the City of Vienna is also conducting training courses. But do you see any additional room of maneuver or additional activities the EU should be more active here in addition to these passing laws? Coming to the second presentation, this also focusing explicitly on the role of public services, also from a human rights perspective. Here I would like to have a brief comment on a methodological note. You didn't mention it in your presentation, but your report mentioned it, that you focused explicitly or dealt with 4 cities in 4 different EU member states, UK, Italy, Greece, and Spain. Why those 4 cities? Why those 4 countries? And what can we actually learn from that? So is there possible to draw some generalizations from that particular case studies? Your paper also focused on bureaucrats and NGOs. What I missed a little bit was the perspective of the migrants or refugees themselves. Of course, it's a big issue, and of course, it may have has something to do with the limitations of a project of 3 years. But I could assume that including the perspective of those people and perspective of migrants, refugees, and their first-hand experiences of discrimination, of challenges, could also add and also inform the recommendations you actually are giving, basically. And also, and this is a little bit related to the individual level of including migrants, also the role of migrant communities. I think you have already mentioned it in your report, but not explicitly, not prominently enough, I would say. So is there something you also consider maybe in a follow-up project to also include migrant communities here, because they have a certain multiplicatory effect in guiding, helping, supporting individual migrants? Which brings me to 3 ideas or potential linkages to how you can connect your research or your reporting or the easyRights project with other strands of political science, basically, is what I missed, and it was more or less, it was missing from, I would say, all 3 presentations was a classical factor of political science, namely the concept of power. You all basically addressed issues like lack of knowledge, the lack of inefficient training, or the relevance of training, but you hardly ever mentioned whether there's also deliberate political will that some migrants should not have the possibilities to access their rights. And you can definitely link this to established research on the politicization of migration, to securitization of migration policies, to EU's restrictive migration approaches, and so on and so forth, or populism. So is there something that you can say on that with regard to your case studies, basically? The second thing is more on what we can call the administrative sciences, is that they also talked a little bit on the capacity building of administration, so that they increase the capacity in order to better deal with these challenges. What does this, I think, well-founded demand mean in times of austerity and downsizing of administrative resources, especially in the context of new public management ideologies? And do you think this may be a challenge in the future for public administrations to deal with these kinds of increasing demand to increase their capacities? And thirdly and finally, also, you're talking about the problems and challenges. Do they really affect all migrants or refugees in a similar way? Or can you differentiate, or have you encountered some differences with regard to certain member states? So are doing some member states better than others? And if yes, then why? Can you say something about differences between different governance levels on the federal, regional, or European level? So how do these different governance levels interact and mitigate or increasing these kinds of problems? Do we also have, can you also differentiate along issue areas when it comes to labor market integration, education, health services? So are the challenges in all of these issue areas or policy domains similar, or are they in some areas better than in others? And also, when it comes to the migrants themselves, do some groups better than others? So are, for example, migrants, refugees doing better or can counter these challenges better if they are better embedded in a migrant community, for example? So these kinds of questions came to my mind when I read your report. And finally, coming to the third presentation, also not much to add here. I also found it very impressive what the City of Vienna actually does, and I can also fully subscribe to the political mandate and the impressing range of activities you're doing here, basically. Also, maybe two brief questions. I would like to hear more on the City of Vienna's level or density of cooperations with other governance levels, both within Austria, so the federal level, but also with regard to the European Union. Or are there also tensions here, that the City of Vienna, of course, we all know that the different political parties here involved in the regional and federal government. So are there also tensions you can point to, and this may also, may these tensions explain some of the problems, challenges, or opportunities you encounter in your day-to-day activities? The second question, I think you have already addressed at the end of your presentation. The question was, what are the most pressing challenges when it came to diversity management? And you addressed some of those issues. But maybe you can briefly also add something. What are really the most pressing issue areas in your work, basically? And finally, and you also mentioned it a little bit in your presentation, how would a more liberal citizenship policy affect your work? Of course, then drawing on the distinction of T.H. Marshall, and of course they will have then the political rights, but also would they have a better access to the social rights, the second paper is mentioning, because how does citizenship affect a better access to education, social housing, education, health services, and so on and so forth. So how does a more liberal citizenship policy also improve the access to social rights of migrants? So that's all from my side. Thank you very much. And also thank you for those very interesting papers.
Dear friends, thanks for the invitation. And as announced by Paula, I take here the floor not so much as an expert, but more as a former bureaucrat of the European Union and former Secretary of the Civil Liberties Committee of the European Parliament from 1998 to 2011. In this capacity, I had the chance of witnessing the first phases of the definition of the EU policy on borders, migration and asylum as the core of the political project to develop the European Union as an area of freedom, security and justice. Having experienced the difficulties of the implementation of such an ambitious political objective, I confess that when 2 years ago I was involved in the easyRights project, I was surprised by its disarming naivety. How can we expect the public administration to measure the efficiency of the public administration? In Italy, we would say that it would be easier to talk about rope in an hanged man's house. Furthermore, the project does not purport to measure only the efficiency of the European administration, but above all, that of the member states, which, as we all know, defend themselves from external controls by the European Union by invoking the principle of their constitutional identity. 2 years later, notwithstanding this first insight, I must say that the approach chosen by easyRights is instead brilliant for the following reason. First of all, because border control, asylum and migration policies are now common EU policies, because the treaty itself requires an integrated approach. Not surprisingly, it is for these three policies that the treaty foresees a solidarity clause, Article 80 of the Treaty of Function of the European Union, which does not call for the goodwill of participants, but instead is a testimony of the responsibility in solid as it was in the old Roman tradition. The concept of an European freedom, security and justice was already clear in 1999 when the Treaty of Amsterdam came into force, but it has now been written in black and white since 2009 with the Lisbon Treaty and of the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Now, controlling the efficiency of an integrated administration is very different from controlling an external administration, as from the beginnings of the European Community was the case in the relationship between Brussels and the capitals of the member states when creating the internal market. After Maastricht, Amsterdam, Nice and Lisbon, the relationship between Brussels and the capitals has changed radically, because Brussels is no longer the external controller, but part of a multi-level governance. And if governance change, the methods of monitoring and control the exercise of the public function also change accordingly. Secondly, because without prejudice of the EU traditional approaches of verifying the implementation of the EU law, your proposed mediation grammar fits more on the complementary neutral evaluation process as described notably for the European Union borders, asylum and migration policies as described in Article 70 of the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union. A first example of such an innovative and complementary evaluation mechanism, which requires close cooperation between the European Commission and the Member States administrations, has already been designed for the evaluation of the Schengen cooperation. See the latest Council Regulation 2022-922 of this year, which establish an operation and evaluation and monitoring mechanism to verify the application of the Schengen acquis. The good news is that for the European asylum system, the so-called SEAS, a similar monitoring mechanism has already been foreseen, as Paola was announcing before, by Article 14 and 15 of Regulation 2021-2303, which was adopted on December 2021 and has created the European Union Agency for Asylum. Moreover, this regulation is already into force, even if the monitoring mechanism should be established before the end of 2023. So we have more than 1 year in face of us. In my opinion, the migration grammar could be a very interesting support for the establishment of the evaluation methodology, which should be adopted in compliance with Article 14, paragraph 2 of the regulation. I am convinced that starting from a cooperative and voluntary standard endorsed moreover by CIN and foreseen by the mediation grammar may be the first step towards successive, more binding regulatory mechanisms, drawing later to mutual recognition and maybe progressive harmonization of member states' administrative practices in these domains. In my opinion, the strong potential of the mediation grammar derives notably by the association of migrants themselves and of the ONGs supporting their successful entry and integration in EU society, as just described by our friends in Vienna. To give you a more clear definition of the already decided monitoring mechanism, let me quote the content of the 2 articles I have just cited. Article 14. The agency, in close cooperation with the Commission, shall establish a monitoring mechanism for the purpose of monitoring the operational and technical application of the common European asylum system in order to prevent or identify possible shortcomings in the asylum and the reception system of member states, and to assess their capacity and preparedness to manage situations of disproportionate pressure so as to enhance the efficiency of those systems. But now the point is the second paragraph. The European Union Asylum Agency Management Board shall, on a proposal of the Executive Director and in consultation with the Commission, establish a common methodology for the monitoring mechanism set out in this chapter. The common methodology shall include objective criteria against which the monitoring shall be carried out, a description of the methods, processes, and tools for the monitoring mechanism, such as practical arrangements for on-site visits, including short notice visits, and rules and principles for the establishment of a team of experts. The monitoring mechanism shall cover the operational and technical application of all aspects of the common European asylum system, and in particular, the system for determining the member states responsible for examining the application for international protection as established by the Dublin Regulation, the application criteria for assessing the need for protection, and the type of protection granted, including as regards the respect for fundamental rights, child protection, safeguards, and the specific needs of persons in a vulnerable situation. Second, the availability and capacity of staff in terms of translation and interpretation, and the capacity of staff to handle and manage asylum cases efficiently, including handling appeals without prejudice to judicial independence and with full respect of the organization of the judiciary of each member state. Third, reception condition, capacity, infrastructure, and equipment, and to the extent possible, financial resources for reception. The monitoring may be carried out in particular on the basis of the information provided by the member states concerned, the information analysis on the situation of asylum referred to in Article 5, and case sampling. The agency may take into account information available from relevant intergovernmental organization or body, in particular UNHCR, and other relevant organizations on the basis of their expertise. The agency may carry out on-site visits for the purpose of monitoring exercise. The agency shall carry out short notice visits. So I can continue read everything. It's very interesting also the Article 15, but Article 15 is more when problems arise. And recommendation should be sent to the administration in case. But this is maybe for another movie.
Thank you, Emilia De Capitani. Thank you, everybody. If you have any question to the panelists, you want to come? Okay.
First, I just wanted to give the microphone to David to answer Peter's questions. You can address them.
Sure. No, thanks for the nice words and the questions. Yeah, I think the first one is an important one. I mean, on how to use technologies to help integration. And as I said, I mean, it's usually always, almost always, the use of technology is very positive for a positive intention. Of course, also increasing the efficiency of border management is something that is very useful, and all public services as such. Because efficiency is also part of good administration as another fundamental right. And when we interviewed users of AI, almost all of them mentioned they are trying to use new technologies to be more efficient. And that was actually a surprise to me, because efficiency, of course, is good on the one hand. but no one actually mentioned the use of algorithms, for example, to make better decisions or more consistent decisions. And I think there's room to explore actually how the use of algorithms, for example, can make decisions more consistent and fairer, for example. And we in 2015, for example, we did a survey at EU external borders about smart borders and asked people what they would think about like a machine as a border guard. And surprisingly, the majority said, oh, that would be nice, because then we can avoid this racist border guard that would only check certain people. But that was back in 2015 when there was still the thought that machines are neutral, and later on we realized actually, no, that may not be the case as such. So it's still an interesting area, I think, to explore further how algorithms can really make more efficient and fairer decisions. On the other hand, efficiency is important, but efficiency alone is not a reason to interfere with any fundamental rights, such as data protection or non-discrimination. And on the other question on additional activities, I think there's a huge focus now on the lawmaking, and I also have to say it's a bit of a success story, because when the discussion started in the beginning, I think in academic circles on the one hand, but also in policy circles, there was a lot of discussion about ethics and artificial intelligence. And of course it was the mission of the Fundamental Rights Agency to say, yeah, ethics of course is fine and important, and it's the basis of many things, but using human rights, and that's why I also like it that it was used in this project, it also has some instrumental authority to it, like it's not a voluntary thing, because what we've seen also in discussions at higher levels is that the companies are quite eager. I mean, they are quite lobbying a lot in this area, and they were quite eager to develop ethical approaches. And ethical approaches, of course, are voluntary approaches. And so I think having the human rights flag as such is good, that we now have the lawmaking process. But of course, as you're saying, it's just the lawmaking. And I think after the lawmaking comes, of course, the implementation, as we're seeing it with the GDPR now. And then, of course, much more is required. As I mentioned, these digital principles, so there are a few action plans that are planned on part of the European Commission, but I also think the funding of projects is really important. I mean, the next Horizon round, for example, to see, because we need more research, as we are still operating in an area where we lack full understanding of like what use cases of new technologies are good and fine to use, and where we still have the problems. And that's also why many of these discussions remain quite abstract and sometimes are linked to science fiction in a way, but we still need to get a much better understanding of different concrete applications. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I will try, Peter, to go through some of the questions. First of all, by providing some context that we skipped a bit, of course, because in a way, we took for granted, wrongly, that all the participants had a clear overview now of the easyRights project, but that's not, of course, the case. First question, the selection of the cities. Those 4 cities are partners of the project. At the beginning, they were selected to have not for comparative purposes. So from a methodological point of view, of course, then we weren't necessarily looking for most similar cases, although now trying to getting also something more academic out of the project, I see that we can easily compare in pairs some of these countries, but the countries were chosen because of the high number of migrants that both receive, of the different natures, the different types of migrants in some way. And geographically cover actually Europe. So having Greece, Italy, Malaga, and the UK. And these are pilots of the project. So since the beginning, they were involved in developing the ICT solutions. And in this respect, their diversity was rather a strength rather than a methodological limitation in this respect, because then we could also cover very different experiences and only keep those findings, let's say, let's call it like that, that are valid for all of them. Then, of course, in the previous panels, we also mentioned some of them that are more specific to one or more specific to another. And one of the, at least the important part of the project is that since the beginning, migrants were involved. We didn't go through the methodology that we used because in a way it was covered by the previous panel, but but it's true that in a way, if we take the policy brief as a standalone output, we have to mention that again because otherwise then the reader misses some points, because the analysis that we conducted was to first have an overview of migrants' perspectives, because what we call the diaries are interviews and observations of migrants' interactions with some public services in the different locations. So this was the starting point, and then migrants were actually observed and involved through hackathons, more specifically throughout the project. Then we involved the ICT developers and then the service providers, so public administration. So in this respect, the different actors were all taken into account and considered in different ways. Then concerning the policy areas, if we saw differences depending on whether the service had to do with one or another policy areas, the kind of services that we are taking into account reduce the dependence of the analysis of the effectiveness on the policy area. So in some cases it was just certification of nationality, in other cases access to English education. When observing the interaction between migrants and the service, the fact that the service provision is embedded in a broader system of governance that, of course, depends on the policy area, did not affect the analysis that, for the policy brief, we were trying to conduct. Concerning the power relations, well, of course. So we probably have to mention that in the policy brief, the fact that, of course, all the policy recommendations are embedded in a system of power relations, but especially since. Especially in the context of the project and considering the approach that the project has taken, so involving since the beginning also the policymaker at the municipal level, the whole development of the project did not reduce the way in which the policymakers were involved, reduced the possibility for those power relations to lower and diminish the impact of the outcomes. But of course, when then going back to the level of policy recommendations, one has to of course be aware of the fact that power relations, of course exist. And a last point on capacity building in times of austerity. Well, that's true. We should acknowledge that. Although all the cities that we have, during the analysis of the pilots, we saw that in many cases it was not necessarily a lack of funding, but rather reorganizing or making more visible some offers that were already existing. But then, of course, if one wants to generalize and suggest that more capacity building should be included, then, of course, the fact that there might be financial constraints plays a role. But in a way, the recommendations try to suggest that training is many times available, that knowledge is already available, and when providing some specific public services, and it's more a matter of mainstreaming the knowledge already available and just have different departments and units and actors talk to each other to then, in a way, reduce the or avoid the financial constraints. But thanks a lot, because approaching the policy brief from a more academic perspective, that now also triggers some further reflections. So that was extremely helpful. I just give the chance to the City of Vienna to respond. Thank you very much. So I just close as a housekeeper at the moment. So I hope we all see. First of all, I hope you all enjoyed the. Yeah, sorry. I hope you all enjoyed the discussion, and we can continue with food in front of us.